What if I told you that the American dream was built on double theft? What if I told you that everything you learned about how this country was built, who built it, and who paid the price, was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep you powerless? Here's the truth they buried. The land you're standing on right now was stolen from indigenous nations. 270 million acres, gone. Taken through treaties that were broken before the ink dried through laws designed to legalize theft through military force that would be called genocide, if we were honest about it. And the labor that built the wealth of this nation stolen from Africa. 12.5 million human beings ripped from their homes, packed into ships like cargo, forced to build an empire that would never belong to them or their children. Two peoples, two thefts, one system of oppression that continues to this very day. But here's what they really don't want you to know. These two peoples were never supposed to meet. They were never supposed to recognize each other as allies. They were never supposed to fight together against the same enemy. Because if Black and Indigenous people ever truly united, if they ever understood that the same hand that stole native land also stole Black labor, if they ever realized they were fighting the same system, that system would crumble. And for a brief moment in American history, that's exactly what happened. In the swamps of Florida, in the heat and danger of the Everglades, escaped enslaved Africans and Seminole people found each other. And instead of the hostility white America expected, instead of the division that would have made conquest easy, they built something that terrified the United States government so much that it launched 3 separate wars to destroy it. They called themselves the Black Seminoles, and their story was erased from every textbook you ever read, because it proved that Black and Indigenous unity was possible, powerful, and absolutely terrifying to white supremacy. After this video, you will never see American history the same way again. You'll understand why they taught you that Native Americans simply vanished. You'll understand why they never told you about armed Black resistance. You'll understand why your family lost land and why Native families lost sovereignty. And you'll understand why mass incarceration, environmental racism, and the wealth gap are not accidents or coincidences, but the continuation of a system that started with stolen land and stolen bodies. By the end of this video, you'll know why Black and Indigenous people were natural allies, not enemies. You'll know how the exact same government policies stole native land through something called the Allotment Act and kept Black people landless through sharecropping and redlining. You'll know why modern prisons are built on stolen native land and filled with Black bodies in what can only be described as slavery by another name. And you'll never look at pipeline protests, gentrification, or police brutality the same way again. This isn't ancient history. The last documented Black Seminole warrior died in 1921, your grandparents' lifetime. The Tulsa Massacre happened that same year. The Indian boarding schools were still operating in 1969, your parents' lifetime. The Dakota Access Pipeline protests happened in 2016. 9 years ago. This theft is ongoing. This oppression is active. This resistance is still necessary. And here's the most important part. Your ancestors lived this. Your great-great-grandparents might have been the ones who escaped slavery and found freedom with the Seminoles. Your ancestors might have walked the Trail of Tears. Your grandmother might have lost her home to urban renewal. Your grandfather might have been denied a mortgage because of redlining. This is your history. This affects your life today. The poverty. You see the lack of land ownership, the mass incarceration, the poisoned water on reservations and in Black neighborhoods. None of it is accident. All of it is design. So let's begin. Let's talk about the alliance they erased. Let's talk about the Black Seminoles. 1693, St. Augustine, Florida, Spanish territory. And something is happening that will change American history forever, even though you've never heard about it. Enslaved Africans are escaping. Not just running north, like the Underground Railroad would later do. They're running south, into Spanish Florida, Why? Because Spain has made an offer that the British colonies to the north find absolutely outrageous. Any enslaved person who escapes to Florida and converts to Catholicism will be granted freedom. Not just freedom, protection, land, the chance to build a new life. Think about what this means. The British colonies, the ones that would become the United States, are building their wealth entirely on enslaved labor. Rice plantations in South Carolina, cotton in Georgia, tobacco in Virginia. The entire economy depends on keeping black people in chains. And here's Spain, right next door, offering freedom to anyone who can make it across the border. The British plantation owners are furious. Their most valuable laborers are escaping. They're losing their investments. They're losing their wealth. But more importantly, they're losing control. Because every enslaved person who successfully escapes and finds freedom in Florida is proof that freedom is possible. Every successful escape is a crack in the foundation of the entire system. And the people escaping aren't just running blindly into the wilderness. They're strategic, they're organized, they're carrying skills. Many of them are Gullah people from the rice plantations of South Carolina and Georgia. They know how to farm in difficult conditions. They know how to navigate waterways. They know how to build. They know how to fight. These are not helpless victims waiting to be rescued. These are people taking their freedom by force and intelligence. When they arrive in Florida, they don't arrive alone. They meet the Seminoles. Now the Seminoles themselves are refugees of a sort. They split off from the Creek Nation in Alabama and Georgia, moving into Florida to escape conflicts with white settlers and other tribal disputes. The word Seminole comes from the Spanish word cimarron, which means wild or runaway. They are people who refuse to be controlled, people who chose freedom and independence over subjugation. So you have two groups of people, both running from oppression, both seeking freedom, both refusing to submit, both being hunted by the same enemy. What happens when they meet white America expected hostility. They expected the Seminoles to turn in the escaped Africans for bounties. They expected division that would make conquest easy. That's not what happened. Instead, they recognized each other. They saw shared struggle. They saw shared enemies. They saw the possibility of shared strength. And they built something that had never existed before and terrified white supremacy more than almost anything else in American history. They built an alliance. The Black Seminoles, as they would come to be called, were not enslaved by the Seminoles. This is crucial. In other so-called civilized tribes like the Cherokee and Creek, some tribal members adopted the practice of slavery from white culture. But the Seminoles were different. The black people living among them were not property. They were allies. They lived in separate villages, maintained their own governance, but fought alongside the Seminoles in every major conflict. They intermarried. They shared language. They created something new. A Creole language that blended African languages with Seminole Creek. A culture that was neither purely African nor purely indigenous, but uniquely both. And they built communities, real communities, with farms and families and futures. They grew crops, they raised livestock, they built homes. They created maroon settlements, self-governing communities of formerly enslaved people living free in the wilderness, protected by geography and by the Seminole Alliance. These weren't temporary hiding places. These were towns. These were civilizations in miniature. These were proof that black people could govern themselves, could thrive without white oversight, could build wealth and safety and culture completely independent of white America. And that is exactly why white America could not allow them to exist. 1817. The First Seminole War begins. The United States is not yet at war with Spain officially. Florida is still Spanish territory. But Andrew Jackson, the man who would later become president, the man whose face is on the $20 bill, doesn't care about international law. He has a mission: recover escaped slaves, destroy the maroon communities, punish the Seminoles for harboring fugitives, and if possible, take Florida for the United States. Andrew Jackson was a slave owner. He owned over 100 enslaved people on his plantation in Tennessee. He had a personal financial interest in the recapture of every escaped person. He had a personal ideological investment in proving that black freedom was impossible. And he had the full backing of plantation owners across the South who were losing laborers and losing wealth to the Florida escape route. So he invades. With over 3,000 troops, he marches into Spanish Florida without authorization from Congress, without a declaration of war, in direct violation of international law. He burns maroon settlements. He destroys Seminole villages. He executes 2 British citizens he accuses of aiding the Seminoles. He captures hundreds of black people and drags them back into slavery. He leaves a path of destruction that forces Spain to realize it can no longer hold Florida. 2 years later, Spain cedes Florida to the United States in the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. But here's what Jackson didn't accomplish. He didn't destroy the Black Seminoles. He didn't break the alliance. The survivors retreated deeper into the Everglades, deeper into the swamps, to places even harder to reach. They regrouped. They rebuilt. They prepared for the next war. Because they knew it was coming, and it did. 1830. The Indian Removal Act. President Andrew Jackson signs it into law. The goal is simple: remove all Native American tribes east of the Mississippi River and relocate them to Indian Territory, which is modern-day Oklahoma. The Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminoles. The so-called 5 civilized tribes. All of them must go. For the Black Seminoles, this is a death sentence. They know what awaits them in Oklahoma. The Cherokee and Creek there have already adopted slavery. If the Black Seminoles are forced to relocate, they will be separated from their Seminole allies and sold back into slavery. White slave catchers are already circling, waiting for the opportunity. Bounty hunters from Georgia and Alabama are offering money for any black person captured during the removal. This isn't just relocation. This is re-enslavement. The Seminoles refuse, not just because they don't want to leave their land, though that's reason enough, but because they will not betray their black allies. They will not allow them to be dragged back into slavery. This is a matter of honor. This is a matter of alliance. This is a matter of shared resistance. And so begins the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842. 7 years of brutal guerrilla warfare in the swamps and forests of Florida. And this is not a minor skirmish. This becomes the most expensive Indian war in American history up to that point. It costs the United States government between $40 and $60 million. That's over $1 billion in today's money. For perspective, that's more than the entire federal budget in 1835. Over 1,500 American soldiers die. Thousands more are injured or incapacitated by disease. The United States military, the most powerful military force on the continent, cannot defeat a few thousand Seminoles and Black Seminoles fighting from the swamps. Let me tell you about one of the leaders. His name was John Horse, also known as Juan Caballo in Spanish, also known as Gopher John in English. Born around 1812 in Florida. His mother was a Black Seminole woman. His father had African and Creek ancestry. He grew up speaking Afro-Seminole, Creole, Creek, English, and Spanish. He was brilliant, charismatic, a warrior and a diplomat. When the Second Seminole War begins, John Horse is in his early 20s. He becomes a translator, negotiating between the Seminole chiefs and the American military. But he's not just a translator. He's a strategist. He understands what's really at stake. The Americans say they just want to relocate the Indians. But John Horse knows they want to recapture the Black Seminoles. He knows that every treaty offered is a trap. In 1837, he's involved in negotiating the Treaty of Fort Dade with Chief Alligator. The U.S. military promises that if the Seminoles surrender, the Black Seminoles will be allowed to go west with them as free people, not as slaves. John Horse knows this is a lie. He knows that the moment they leave Florida, slave catchers will swarm them. And he's right. Even as Seminoles begin to surrender and prepare for removal, white Southerners arrive claiming ownership of Black Seminoles. They bring documents real or forged, claiming these people are their property. The military, despite its promises, does nothing to stop them. Some Black Seminoles are dragged away in chains before they even leave Florida. John Horse refuses to surrender. He leads his people deeper into the Everglades. They wage guerrilla war. They ambush supply lines. They attack and then vanish into the swamps where the U.S. Army cannot follow. They use the land itself as a weapon. The Everglades are brutal. Alligators, venomous snakes, mosquitoes carrying malaria and yellow fever, oppressive heat water too brackish to drink. For soldiers from northern states, it's hell. For the Black Seminoles and Seminoles, who know every path, every dry spot, every hidden water source, it's a fortress. The war drags on, year after year. The United States keeps sending more troops, more money, more resources, and they keep failing. By 1842, the government is exhausted. They've spent a fortune. They've lost thousands of men. They've achieved almost nothing. So they offer a compromise. Any Seminole who surrenders will be allowed to relocate to Oklahoma. Some accept. Thousands of Seminoles and Black Seminoles are forced onto boats and shipped west. But some refuse. They stay hidden in the Everglades, and the United States, bankrupt and humiliated, lets them stay. To this day, the Seminole Nation of Florida has never signed a peace treaty with the United States. They never surrendered. They are the unconquered. But for the Black Seminoles who were forced to relocate, the nightmare was just beginning. In Oklahoma, they were surrounded by tribes that practiced slavery. Slave catchers from Arkansas and Texas crossed the border, regularly kidnapping Black Seminoles and selling them south. The promises made by the U.S. military meant nothing. The treaties meant nothing. John Horse watched his people being stolen one by one, and he knew there was only one option: leave. Again, 1850. John Horse leads a group of over 200 Black Seminoles out of Oklahoma. They're not going north, they're going south, to Mexico. Why Mexico? Because Mexico abolished slavery in 1829. Because Mexico is offering land to anyone willing to settle the northern frontier and defend it from Comanche and Apache raids. Because Mexico is the only place left where they can be truly free. They walk hundreds of miles through Texas, a state that would love nothing more than to capture them and sell them into slavery. They travel at night. They avoid towns. They survive on whatever they can hunt or gather. Women, children, elders, warriors, all of them walking toward a freedom that keeps moving further away. And they make it. They reach Coahuila, Mexico. The Mexican government welcomes them, gives them land, asks them to serve as border scouts defending against raids. John Horse becomes the leader of the Mascogo people, as they're known in Mexico. He builds a community. They farm. They raise families. They live free. John Horse lives there for over 30 years until his death, around 1882. He never returns to the United States. He never becomes a slave. He dies a free man. His descendants still live in Mexico to today. They still speak Afro-Seminole Creole. They still remember the Alliance. They still carry the legacy of a people who refused to be property, who fought 3 wars against the most powerful nation on earth, and who won their freedom, not because it was given to them, but because they took it and defended it with blood and brilliance. That is the story of the Black Seminoles, warriors who fought alongside indigenous allies, refugees who crossed deserts to stay free, diplomats who negotiated treaties while carrying rifles, survivors of 3 wars who built new nations in exile, and their story was erased completely. You didn't learn about John Horse in school. You didn't learn about the Alliance. You didn't learn that Black and Indigenous people fought together, bled together, built futures together. Why? Because that alliance terrified white supremacy. Because if you knew that unity was possible, you might try it yourself. Because if you knew your ancestors refused to be enslaved and succeeded, you might refuse to accept oppression today. But hold on. Because the Black Seminoles weren't the only example of this alliance. They weren't even the first. Let me take you back further. 1693, St. Augustine, Florida. The establishment of Fort Mose, the first free Black town in North America. 100 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, there was a town where Black people lived, free-governed themselves, and fought as soldiers defending their liberty. Fort Mose wasn't hidden in the wilderness. It was 2 miles north of St. Augustine, the Spanish colonial capital. It was official, recognized, protected by the Spanish crown. How did this happen? Spain was at war with Britain. They needed soldiers. They needed people willing to defend Florida. So they made an offer. Any enslaved person who escaped from the British colonies and converted to Catholicism would be granted freedom and land. And they would serve in the militia defending Spanish Florida. Enslaved people from South Carolina and Georgia heard this and ran. By the hundreds they escaped and made their way south. And Spain kept its word. In 1693, Spanish officials formally recognized a community of free Black people near St. Augustine. By 1738, they built Fort Mose, a fortified town with a church home's farmland and a militia. The leader of Fort Mose was a man named Francisco Menendez. He had been enslaved in South Carolina, escaped to Florida, earned his freedom, and rose to become the captain of the Black militia. Think about that. A formerly enslaved African man commanding troops defending a colonial outpost, negotiating with Spanish governors as an equal. This was 1738, over 100 years before the Civil War. Francisco Menendez was proof that Black people could lead, could fight, could govern, if only they were given freedom and respect. In 1740, British forces from Georgia attacked Fort Mose. They wanted to destroy it. They wanted to prove that free Black communities couldn't survive. They wanted to recapture the formerly enslaved people and drag them back to South Carolina plantations. Francisco Menendez led the defense. His militia, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity that shocked the British. They drove them back. They defended the fort. They won. But in 1743, war between Spain and Britain intensified. Fort Mose was too exposed, too vulnerable. The residents abandoned it temporarily and retreated to St. Augustine proper. Then in 1752, they rebuilt Fort Mose, and it stood until 1763, when Spain ceded Florida to Britain in the Treaty of Paris. At that point, the residents of Fort Mose, knowing the British would re-enslave them, evacuated to Cuba with the Spanish. They left, but they left free. Fort Mose existed for decades. It proved Black self-governance was possible. It proved Black military capability was real. It proved that given freedom and land, Black people could build, defend, and sustain a community. And yet you've never heard of it. It's not in textbooks. It's not in movies. It's not part of the American narrative. Because the American narrative requires you to believe that Black people were helpless until white saviors freed them. The existence of Fort Mose destroys that lie, so they erased it. Now let me connect this to something you need to understand. Fort Mose, the Black Seminoles. These weren't isolated incidents. Across the Americas, wherever slavery existed, Maroon communities formed. Jamaica had the Windward and Leeward Maroons, who fought the British to a standstill and won treaties recognizing their autonomy. Suriname had the Saramacca and Ndyuka Maroons, who defeated Dutch colonial forces. Brazil had Quilombo dos Palmares, a Maroon kingdom that lasted almost 100 years and had a population of over 30,000 people. Enslaved Africans didn't just endure slavery. They resisted it. They escaped it. They built alternatives to it. They created free black societies in the mountains and swamps and forests of the New World. And they often did it in alliance with indigenous peoples who were also resisting European colonization. This is the pattern they erased. This is the history they buried. Because if you knew that black and indigenous unity was the norm, not the exception, you might build that unity today. And that terrifies the system that profits from your division. But what I'm about to show you next will make you understand why this history matters right now. Because the theft didn't stop with slavery. The theft didn't stop with the Seminole Wars. The theft became policy. Systematic, legal, ongoing. And it targeted both black and indigenous people using the exact same strategies. Let me show you how they stole the land and how they stole the labor, and how those two thefts are actually the same crime with different victims. 1887. February 8th. President Grover Cleveland signs the General Allotment Act into law. You've probably never heard of it. It's not taught in schools. It should be. Because this single law stole more land from Native Americans than any war, any massacre, any treaty violation in American history. 90 million acres. Gone. Legally stolen. And it laid the blueprint for every land theft scheme that followed, including the ones that targeted black communities. Before I explain how it worked, let me show you what existed before 1887. Native nations held land communally. Tribes owned reservations collectively. No individual owned a specific plot. The land belonged to the people as a whole, managed by tribal governments, used for the collective good. Hunting grounds, farming areas, sacred sites, all of it shared. This wasn't primitive or inefficient. This was sophisticated land management that had sustained indigenous peoples for thousands of years. But white America looked at this and saw wasted opportunity. They saw millions of acres that weren't being bought, sold, divided, taxed, or exploited for profit. They saw land that could make white settlers wealthy if only they could get their hands on it. So they designed a law that would break up communal land ownership force assimilation and open up the majority of reservation land to white settlement. They called it the Dawes Act, named after Senator Henry Dawes of Massachusetts, one of its primary architects. Here's how it worked. The federal government would take reservation land and divide it into individual allotments. Each native family would receive 160 acres. Sounds generous, right? Sounds like they're helping native people become landowners, farmers, self-sufficient. That's how they sold it to the public. Here's what they didn't say. First, the allotments were assigned only to male heads of household. Native women, who in many tribes held significant property rights and decision-making power, were excluded. If you were a woman without a husband, you got nothing. If you were a child without a father, you got nothing. This wasn't an oversight. This was designed to strip power from Native women and impose patriarchal European family structures. Second, the government decided who got which land. They didn't let tribes decide. They didn't respect traditional use patterns. They assigned parcels based on what white surveyors thought was appropriate. So families who had lived near rivers for generations might be assigned dry land miles away. Farmers might get rocky, unarable soil. Hunters might get landlocked parcels with no access to game. The assignments were arbitrary and often deliberately bad, designed to make native farming fail, so white settlers could later claim the Indians couldn't handle the responsibility. Third, and this is the key, after every family received their 160-acre allotment, the rest of the reservation land was declared surplus. And surplus land was sold to white settlers. Let me say that again. The government took reservation land that belonged to the tribe, gave tiny parcels to individual native families, and then sold everything left over to white people. Millions and millions of acres. Sold for pennies, given away through homesteading programs, transferred to railroad companies, handed to white farmers and ranchers who had been eyeing that land for decades. Before the Allotment Act, native nations collectively held approximately 138 million acres. By 1934, when the law was finally repealed, native people held only 48 million acres. 90 million acres stolen. 2/3 of all remaining native land. Gone. In less than 50 years. But it gets worse. The allotments themselves were held in trust by the federal government for 25 years. The idea was that native people needed time to learn how to be farmers, how to manage property, how to be civilized. Paternalistic racism dressed up as help. During that 25-year period, the land couldn't be sold. But after 25 years, the trust period ended. And here's where the theft became truly diabolical. Once the trust ended, the land became subject to state property taxes. Native families who had never paid property taxes, who had no experience with the concept, who often had no cash income, suddenly owed money to state governments. And if they didn't pay, the land was seized and sold at tax auctions. Thousands of allotments were lost this way. Families who had been given land in 1890 lost it in 1915 because they didn't pay a tax bill. They didn't understand for a system they hadn't asked to join. Even for families who kept their land, there was another trap. When the original allotment holder died, the land was divided among all heirs according to state inheritance laws. So 160 acres became 80 acres, split between 2 children. Then 40 acres, split among 4 grandchildren. Then 20 acres, among 8 great-grandchildren. Within a few generations, you had dozens of people each owning a tiny fraction of a single parcel of land. This is called fractionated ownership, and it makes the land virtually unusable. You can't farm 5 acres. You can't build on 2 acres shared among 12 owners. So the land sits idle, or it gets leased to white farmers for pennies, or it gets sold off piece by piece. This was the design. Break up communal ownership, assign allotments that would fail, sell the surplus, tax the remainder, divide the inheritance. Within 2 generations, most native land would pass into white hands. And it did. By the time the Allotment Act was repealed in 1934, under the Indian Reorganization Act, the damage was done. 90 million acres stolen. Tribal sovereignty shattered. Communal land ownership destroyed. Poverty locked in for generations. Do you see what happened? The government took land that belonged to entire nations and turned it into individual property that could be taxed, sold, divided, and lost. They turned collective wealth into individual vulnerability. And once the land was individualized, it was easy to take. This is how you steal a continent legally. You pass a law, you call it help, and you watch as the theft unfolds over decades so slowly that by the time people realize what happened, it's too late to stop it. Now let me show you the same theft applied to black people. Different mechanism, same result. 1865. The Civil War ends. Slavery is abolished by the 13th Amendment. 4 million formerly enslaved people are suddenly free. Free but with nothing. No land, no money, no education, no tools, Nothing but the clothes on their backs and the promise that things would be different now. During the war, there had been talk. General William Tecumseh Sherman had issued Special Field Order No. 15 in January 1865, setting aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. It was to be divided into 40-acre plots and given to formerly enslaved families. 40 acres and a mule. That was the promise. Land, the means to farm it, a chance to build wealth, to be self-sufficient, to finally own something after generations of being owned. And it started to happen. By June 1865, 40,000 formerly enslaved people had been settled on 400,000 acres. They were farming, building homes, creating communities. For the first time in their lives, they owned land. They were building wealth. They had a future. Then President Andrew Johnson, a Southerner and former slave owner, reversed the order. In the fall of 1865, he pardoned thousands of former Confederates and returned their land. The land that had been given to black families was taken back. 40,000 people were evicted. The 40 acres were gone. The mules were gone. The promise was broken, and it was never restored. Congress debated land redistribution for years. Some radical Republicans pushed for it, but Southern Democrats and moderate Republicans blocked it. They said it would be too expensive. They said it would punish white Southerners unfairly. They said black people weren't ready for land ownership. So it never happened. 4 million people freed with nothing. No reparations, no land, no restitution. Just freedom in name and poverty in reality. So what were they supposed to do? Most had no choice but to return to the very plantations they had just been freed from, not as slaves, but as sharecroppers. Let me explain how sharecropping worked, because this is slavery by another name. Here's the setup. A white landowner owns a plantation. He needs labor to work it. Black families need a way to survive. So the landowner offers a deal. You work my land. I provide the seed, the tools, the cabin to live in. At harvest, we split the crop. 50-50. Sounds fair, right? It's not. First, the landowner controls the accounting. He's the one who weighs the crop. He's the one who decides what the market price is. He's the one who calculates your share. And somehow, every single year, the sharecropper's share is just a little bit less than what they owe for the seed, tools, and rent. Every year, the sharecropper ends up in debt. And debt means you can't leave. If you owe the landowner money, you're legally bound to stay and work off the debt. This is called debt peonage, and it was widespread across the South for decades after the Civil War. Second, many Southern states passed laws making it a crime to leave a job while in debt. So if you tried to escape, you'd be arrested, charged with theft or fraud, and either sent back to the plantation or sent to prison. Which brings me to the third part of the system. Convict leasing. Remember the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime. That exception, those 6 words, created a loophole big enough to drive the entire Southern economy through. After emancipation, Southern states immediately passed black codes laws that criminalized behavior specifically targeting black people. Vagrancy laws made it illegal to be unemployed. If you didn't have a job, you could be arrested. Loitering laws made it illegal to stand around in public. Apprenticeship laws allowed the state to take black children from their parents and bind them to white employers. These weren't laws designed to keep order. These were laws designed to re-enslave. Once arrested, black men, women, and children were sentenced to hard labor, and Southern states, desperate for revenue after the war, leased those convicts to private companies. Plantations, mines, railroads, turpentine camps. The companies paid the state for the labor. The state pocketed the money. The convicts worked in conditions often worse than slavery, Because unlike enslaved people who were property, and therefore had some value to be kept alive, convicts were expendable. If they died, the company just leased more. Mortality rates in convict labor camps were staggering, 20 to 40% in some camps. Worked to death, beaten to death, died of disease malnutrition exposure. And it was legal. This system persisted well into the 20th century. Alabama didn't outlaw convict leasing until 1928. Some forms of prison labor continue to this day. Right now, in 2025, prisoners in the United States are paid as little as 13 cents an hour to fight wildfires, manufacture goods, work in fields. The 13th Amendment loophole is still being exploited. Slavery never ended. It evolved. So here's what happened to Black people after emancipation. Promised land denied. Forced into sharecropping, which created debt. Debt that couldn't be escaped without risking arrest. Arrest that led to convict leasing, which was slavery. The system was designed to trap Black people in poverty and extract their labor for profit just like before, but now it was legal. Now it had the appearance of freedom. Now it couldn't be called slavery, even though that's exactly what it was. And here's the connection. Native people lost their land through the Allotment Act. Black people were never given land in the first place, then trapped in systems that made acquiring land impossible. Both groups were systematically denied the primary source of wealth in an agricultural economy: land. And without land, you can't build wealth. Without wealth, you can't build power. Without power, you can't resist when they come for what little you have left. But the theft didn't stop there. Let me take you to the 20th century. Let me show you how the same strategies were used in cities. How Black communities that managed to build wealth despite all the obstacles were targeted, destroyed, and erased. And how the land they lived on was stolen just as thoroughly as any reservation land. 1921. Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Greenwood District. 35 square blocks of Black-owned businesses, homes, churches, schools. Over 10,000 residents. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, entrepreneurs. Black people who had built wealth despite Jim Crow, despite segregation, despite every law designed to keep them poor. They called it Black Wall Street because it was the wealthiest Black community in America. More Black-owned businesses per capita than anywhere else in the country. A movie theater, a hospital, banks, hotels, newspapers. Wealth. Real generational wealth. On May 31st, 1921, a white mob numbering in the thousands attacked Greenwood. They burned it to the ground. 35 city blocks. Over 1,200 homes destroyed. Every business burned. The hospital, the schools, the churches, all of it reduced to ash. 300 Black people murdered, though the real number is likely much higher because bodies were dumped in mass graves and the Arkansas River. White mobs didn't just burn buildings. They shot Black people fleeing the flames. They threw bodies into the fires. They looted homes and businesses before burning them. And the Tulsa police didn't stop them. The police participated. They deputized white rioters and gave them guns. The National Guard, when it finally arrived, didn't protect Black residents. They rounded them up and put them in internment camps for days. And here's the theft. After the massacre, the city changed the building codes. They required all new construction in Greenwood to be brick. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the city refused to give building permits for anything less than brick, and banks, all of them white-owned, refused to give loans to Black people to afford brick construction. So Black residents couldn't rebuild. Their land, which they still technically owned, was now unusable. And the city began quietly acquiring those parcels through tax foreclosure, eminent domain, and forced sales. Within a few years, much of Greenwood was in white hands. A highway was built through the heart of the district decades later, further destroying what remained. The wealth was gone. The land was gone. And for 75 years, the Tulsa Massacre wasn't taught in Oklahoma schools. 3 generations grew up not knowing it happened. This wasn't unique. Rosewood, Florida, 1923. A black town destroyed by a white mob. Every building burned. Every resident fled or killed. The town was erased from the map. Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. A white supremacist coup overthrew the elected multiracial government, killed dozens of black residents, and burned the black newspaper and black-owned businesses. Elaine, Arkansas, 1919. Over 200 black sharecroppers massacred for organizing a union to demand fair payment. Their land was seized. Their families were driven out. Every single time black people built wealth, every single time they acquired land, every single time they organized economically, white supremacy responded with violence and theft. And the pattern is clear. Massacre. Burn the property records. Refuse insurance claims. Change the laws to prevent rebuilding. Take the land. This happened over and over and over again across America, and none of it was in your textbooks. You are not a victim. Let me say that again. You are not a victim. You are a survivor of attempted genocide. You are a descendant of people who were hunted, enslaved, massacred, dispossessed, and they survived anyway. You carry that survival in your DNA. You carry that resistance in your blood. You carry that refusal to be broken in your spirit. Your ancestors were warriors. Not metaphorically, literally. The Black Seminoles fought 3 wars against the United States military and won their freedom. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't beg for mercy. They picked up rifles and machetes and fought, and they won. John Horse led 200 people across hostile territory to Mexico and built a new nation in exile. That's not weakness. That's not victimhood. That's power. Your ancestors were builders. Fort Mose wasn't given to them. They built it, with their hands, while being hunted by slave catchers. They built a fortified town with a church and farms and a militia. And when the British attacked, they defended it and won. That's not luck. That's strategy. That's courage. That's excellence. Your ancestors were wealthy. Black Wall Street wasn't a fantasy. It was real. Real millionaires. Real banks. Real businesses. Real generational wealth. Built despite Jim Crow. Built despite segregation. Built despite every law designed to keep them poor. They did that. And the only reason it's gone is because it was destroyed by violence and theft. Not because they failed. Because they succeeded so well that white supremacy couldn't tolerate it. Your native ancestors were sovereigns. They governed nations. They managed millions of acres of land sustainably for thousands of years. They built civilizations, trade networks, agricultural systems, legal codes, cultures that sustained entire peoples. And when invaders came, they fought. The Seminoles never surrendered. Never. They're still here. Still sovereign. Still resisting. That's in you. So when I say you're not a victim, I mean it. Victims are helpless. Your ancestors were not helpless. They fought. They resisted. They survived. They built. And every time they were knocked down, they got back up. Every time their wealth was stolen, they built it again. Every time they were pushed off their land, they found new land or took it back. Every time they were told to submit, they refused. That is your inheritance, not poverty, not trauma. Strength, resistance, resilience, power. Now I need you to understand something else. Your poverty is not your fault. The lack of wealth in your family is not because your grandparents made bad choices. It's not because your parents didn't work hard enough. It's not because you don't value education or savings or investment. Your poverty was designed. It was created through systematic theft. 40 acres denied. Black Wall Street burned. Redlining enforced. Urban renewal demolishing your neighborhoods. The Allotment Act stealing your land. Reservations underfunded. Treaties broken. Generation after generation after generation of theft. If your great-great-grandparents had been allowed to keep the land they were promised or owned, you would be wealthy today. If the GI Bill had been applied fairly, if redlining hadn't existed, if urban renewal hadn't demolished black neighborhoods, the median black family would have wealth equal to or greater than white families. If the Allotment Act hadn't stolen 90 million acres, Native nations would control resources worth trillions of dollars. The poverty you see is not natural. It's not inevitable. It's manufactured. It's the intended result of policy. And that means it can be reversed. You are owed. Let me be very clear about this. Reparations are not charity. Reparations are repayment. They are what happens when you steal someone's property and you're forced to give it back. If someone stole your car and the police recovered it, you wouldn't say, "Thank you for the charity." You'd say, "Give me back what's mine." That's reparations. Returning what was stolen. Land back is not a radical demand. It's the enforcement of signed treaties. It's the return of stolen property. If I broke into your house, took your deed, kicked you out, and sold your house to someone else, you wouldn't accept that as permanent. You demand your house back. That's land back. Returning stolen land to the people it was stolen from. These are not favors. These are not gifts. These are debts. Debts owed by the United States government, by state governments, by the corporations and families that built wealth on stolen land and stolen labor. And debts must be paid. That's not revenge. That's not anger. That's justice. That's math. They took trillions of dollars of value from your ancestors. They owe trillions of dollars to you. Simple. And here's what I need you to understand about power. You have more of it than you think. They want you to feel powerless. They want you to think the system is too big, too entrenched, too powerful to challenge. They want you to think that resistance is futile, that you should just accept things the way they are and try to survive. But that's a lie. And your ancestors prove it's a lie. The Black Seminoles were outnumbered, outgunned, hunted by the most powerful military on the continent. And they stayed free. How not because they were stronger, because they were smarter, because they used the terrain, because they allied with people who shared their struggle, because they refused to accept defeat. Strategy. Alliance. Refusal. That's power. The water protectors at Standing Rock, they didn't stop the pipeline. That's true. But they exposed it. They made the world pay attention. They built a coalition of indigenous and non-indigenous people that continues to resist pipeline projects across North America. They showed that resistance is possible, that indigenous sovereignty still matters, that people will fight. That's power. Not the power to win every battle, the power to refuse surrender, the power to inspire others, the power to build movements that outlast individual defeats. You have that same power. You can refuse to accept the lies. You can learn the truth and share it. You can teach your children and grandchildren what really happened. You can vote for reparations and land back. You can support indigenous sovereignty. You can join coalitions. You can protest pipelines and environmental racism. You can demand that schools teach real history. You can refuse to let them erase you again. Every time you speak truth, you break the system's hold on one more person. Every time you teach someone what really happened, you dismantle the propaganda machine. Every time you organize, you build power. That's not small. That's everything. Now let me talk about faith, because I know many of you are people of faith. You believe in God, you go to church, you pray, and you've been taught that faith means patience, that faith means waiting for God to act, that faith means accepting suffering because God has a plan. And there's truth in that. But there's also something else, something the Black church has always known, but sometimes forgets. God didn't free the Israelites from Egypt and then carry them to the Promised Land. He freed them, and then He told them to fight, to conquer, to take what was theirs. The Promised Land wasn't empty, it was occupied. And God didn't clear it out for them. He told them to do it. With faith, yes. With His blessing, yes. But with swords and strategy and courage. Faith and action. Not faith instead of action. Faith that empowers action. Your ancestors understood this. They prayed, and they fought. They had faith, and they picked up rifles. They trusted God, and they built fortified towns and defended them. They believed God would deliver them, and they walked hundreds of miles through hostile territory to freedom. Faith and action. That's the model. So when I say you need to demand reparations, demand land back, resist environmental racism, fight mass incarceration, that's not separate from faith. That's faith in action. That's trusting that God is on the side of justice and acting accordingly. That's believing that God preserved your people through slavery, through genocide, through massacres, through theft for a reason. And the reason is this: so you could be here today, so you could learn the truth, so you could demand justice, so you could build the future that your ancestors fought for, but didn't live to see. God didn't preserve you through the Middle Passage so you could stay quiet. He preserved you so you could speak. God didn't preserve you through the trail of tears so you could accept poverty. He preserved you so you could reclaim what was stolen. God didn't bring you to this moment by accident. This is divine appointment. You finding this video, you hearing this truth, you understanding your history. This is God saying, it's time. Time to stop accepting oppression. Time to stop believing the lies. Time to demand what's owed. Time to build what should have been yours all along. And here's the promise. You are not alone in this. The same God who brought your ancestors through slavery is with you. The same God who protected maroon communities in the swamps is with you. The same God who gave the Seminoles strength to fight 3 wars and stay free is with you. The same God who sustained native nations through genocide and forced removal is with you. You are not fighting this alone. You are fighting with the strength of your ancestors, with the support of everyone who seeks justice, and with the power of a God who hates oppression and loves righteousness. So let me tell you who you are. You are a child of warriors who refuse to be enslaved. You are a descendant of builders who created wealth from nothing. You are an heir to stolen empires and stolen land. You are a keeper of erased history. You are a voice for the silenced. You are a fighter in a war that started before you were born and will continue after you die. You are a coalition builder in the tradition of the Black Seminoles. You are a water protector in the tradition of Standing Rock. You are a truth teller in the tradition of those who documented massacres when everyone else wanted to forget. You are owed. You are powerful. You are necessary. You are unbreakable. They tried to break your ancestors. They failed. They tried to erase your history. You know it now. They tried to divide you from your natural allies. You see the connection now. They tried to make you accept poverty as normal. You understand it's theft now. They tried to make you powerless. But you're not. You never were. You just didn't know the truth. Now you do. So here's what I need you to do. Right now. In this moment, before this video ends, I need you to make a decision. Are you going to accept what I've shown you and do nothing? Are you going to feel angry for a moment and then go back to accepting the system? Or are you going to let this truth change you? Are you going to let it radicalize you in the truest sense of that word? To go to the root, to understand the root cause of oppression and commit to tearing it out. If this video has shaken you, if this truth has hit you in your chest, I need you to do something right now. Go to the comments and type alliance, just that word, alliance, because that's what this is about. The alliance between Black and Indigenous people that terrified the system so much they erased it from history. Type alliance if you understand that your liberation and Indigenous liberation are tied together. Type alliance if you're ready to fight for both. Type alliance if you refuse to be divided anymore, and hit that like button. I know that sounds trivial, but it's not. YouTube's algorithm decides who sees this video based on engagement. Every like pushes this video to more people. Every like is an act of resistance against an algorithm designed to suppress truth and promote entertainment. Your like is a vote for truth, a vote for justice, a vote to make sure more people see what you just saw. So do it, right now, and share this video. Send it to your family, send it to your friends, send it to your church group, send it to people who think racism ended with the Civil Rights Act. Send it to people who don't understand why reparations are necessary. Send it to people who think Native Americans just need to get over the past. Send it to white people who claim they're colorblind and don't see race. They need to see this. They need to know what their ancestors did and what they continue to benefit from. This isn't about making them feel guilty. This is about making them understand that justice requires action, requires repayment, requires change. But don't just share it passively. Share it with intention. Write a message. Say this video changed how I see American history. Say, I finally understand why the wealth gap exists. Say, I need you to watch this and then, let's talk. Make it a conversation starter. Make it a tool for education. Make it a weapon against propaganda. Now I'm going to ask you to do something harder. I need you to subscribe to this channel. And here's why. This isn't the only story they erased. There are hundreds more, thousands more. Stories of Black people who armed themselves and fought back. Stories of Indigenous resistance that succeeded. Stories of coalitions between oppressed peoples. Stories of wealth that was built and stolen. Stories of leaders who were assassinated because they were too effective. Stories of movements that were crushed because they threatened the system. I'm going to tell all of those stories, every single one I can find. And if you're not subscribed, you'll miss them. You'll go back to the algorithm feeding you entertainment and distraction. You'll forget the fire you felt watching this video. You'll slip back into accepting the world as it is. I can't let that happen. You can't let that happen. So subscribe, turn on notifications, make sure you see every video. Make this channel part of your education, part of your resistance, part of your refusal to be lied to anymore. And here's the most important thing. Tell your children, tell your grandchildren. Sit them down and say, I learned something today that they didn't teach me in school. And then teach them. Teach them about the Black Seminoles. Teach them about Fort Mose. Teach them about the Allotment Act. Teach them about Black Wall Street. Teach them about Standing Rock. Teach them the truth, because if you don't, the schools won't. The textbooks won't. The system will feed them the same lies it fed you, and another generation will grow up not knowing what was stolen, not knowing what's owed, not knowing that resistance is possible and necessary. Your children need to know they come from warriors. They need to know they come from builders. They need to know their poverty is not their fault. They need to know they're owed. They need to know their liberation is tied to indigenous liberation. They need to know that unity is power. Teach them. It's your responsibility. It's your inheritance to pass down. Not just genes, not just names. Truth, history, identity, power. And beyond your family, I need you to organize. Join organizations fighting for reparations. H.R. 40, the bill to study reparations for slavery, has been introduced in Congress repeatedly. It needs support. Call your representatives. Demand they co-sponsor it. Demand they vote for it. Join the movement for Black lives. Join Indigenous-led organizations fighting for land, back, and sovereignty. Join environmental justice organizations fighting pollution in Black and Native communities. Join prison abolition movements fighting mass incarceration. These movements need you. They need your voice, your energy, your resources, your presence, and build coalitions. This is critical. Black and Indigenous people need to recognize each other as allies, not competitors. When Native activists are protesting a pipeline, show up. When Black activists are protesting police brutality, show up. When environmental racism is poisoning a community, show up. Solidarity is not abstract, it's concrete. It's bodies at protests. It's money to bail funds. It's signal boosting on social media. It's showing up even when it's not your specific issue because you recognize it's all the same fight. The system wants you divided, wants you competing for scraps, wants you thinking that Native people getting land back somehow takes from Black people, wants you thinking that Black people getting reparations somehow hurts Native people. That's a lie. Justice is not a finite resource. There's enough land, there's enough money, there's enough power. The only question is whether you're going to fight for it together or separately. Together, you win. Separately, you lose. It's that simple. And finally, live differently. Don't just consume this information and then continue participating in the system as if nothing changed. If you understand that capitalism was built on slavery and land theft, then resist capitalism. Support Black-owned businesses. Support Native-owned businesses. Buy from cooperatives. Invest in community land trusts. Build alternative economic systems that don't rely on exploitation. If you understand that the criminal justice system is slavery, then work to dismantle it. Don't call the police unless absolutely necessary. Support restorative justice. Support bail funds. Support re-entry programs. Support prison abolition. If you understand that environmental racism is land theft, then resist it. Oppose pipelines and toxic facilities in poor neighborhoods. Support renewable energy that's community-owned, not corporate-owned. Reduce consumption. Live sustainably. Every choice you make is political. Every dollar you spend is a vote. Every action you take either supports the system or resists it. Be intentional. Be strategic. Be consistent. Live like you believe what you know. Live like your ancestors are watching. Because they are. And they're asking whether you're going to honor their struggle, whether you're going to finish what they started, whether you're going to build the future they died fighting for. You can. You have everything you need. You have the truth now. You have the history. You have the understanding. You have the power. The only question is whether you'll use it. I believe you will. Because you wouldn't have watched this far if you weren't the kind of person who seeks truth and acts on it. You wouldn't have stayed through over an hour of hard history if you weren't ready to do something with it. So do it. Start today. Start now. Comment Alliance. Like this video. Share it. Subscribe. Teach your children. Join organizations. Build coalitions. Live differently. Demand justice. Refuse to be silent. Refuse to be divided. refuse to accept oppression as normal. You are the descendant of people who survived the unsurvivable. You carry their strength. Honor it. You are the heir to stolen wealth and stolen land. Reclaim it. You are the voice of erased history. Speak it. You are the future your ancestors fought for. Build it. They couldn't break your ancestors. They failed. They tried to erase your history. You know it now. They tried to steal everything. You're taking it back. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Today. Right now. This is your moment. This is your calling. This is your fight. And you will win. Because justice is on your side. Truth is on your side. Your ancestors are on your side. And God is on your side. Walk in that power. Walk in that truth. Walk in that refusal to accept anything less than full justice. You are not a victim. You are a warrior. Act like it. Now let's pray. Bow your heads with me. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let's talk to God together. Father God, we come before you today with heavy hearts and fierce spirits. We come with the weight of history on our shoulders and the fire of justice in our bellies. We come as the descendants of people who were enslaved, dispossessed, massacred, hunted, and erased. And we come as survivors, as warriors, as your children who refuse to be broken. We thank you, God, for preserving our ancestors, for bringing them through the Middle Passage, for sustaining them through slavery, for giving them the courage to escape and the wisdom to find allies. We thank you for the Black Seminoles who fought 3 wars and stayed free, for John Horse, who led his people to freedom in Mexico, for Francisco Menendez, who defended Fort Mose and won, for the Maroons who built free communities in the wilderness, for every unnamed ancestor who resisted, who survived, who refused to be property. We thank you for preserving Native nations through genocide, for the Seminoles who never surrendered, for the Cherokee who walked the Trail of Tears and survived, for the Lakota who fought at Little Bighorn and won, for the Water Protectors who stood at Standing Rock and refused to move, for every unnamed ancestor who fought for land, for sovereignty, for the right to exist. We thank you for their strength. We carry it now. We thank you for the truth we learned today, for the history that was hidden being brought to light, for the connections we see now between Black and Indigenous struggle, for the understanding that we are allies, not competitors, for the revelation that our poverty is not our fault, but the result of systematic theft. We thank you for opening our eyes, for breaking the chains of propaganda, for setting us free through truth. Now, God, we ask for justice. We ask for what is owed. We ask for the 90 million acres of native land stolen through the Allotment Act to be returned. We ask for the trillions of dollars of Black wealth stolen through slavery massacres, redlining, and urban renewal to be repaid. We ask for reparations, not as charity, not as a favor, but as repayment, as restitution, as justice. We ask for the prisons built on stolen land and filled with our children to be emptied. We ask for the 13th Amendment loophole that allows slavery as punishment for crime to be closed. We ask for an end to mass incarceration. We ask for freedom, real freedom, not the freedom to be poor and oppressed, the freedom to be safe, healthy, wealthy, powerful. We ask for the pipelines that threaten native water and sacred sites to be stopped. We ask for the petrochemical plants poisoning Black and Native neighborhoods to be shut down. We ask for clean air, clean water, clean land. We ask for environmental justice, for the end of sacrifice zones, for the recognition that all lives matter equally, that no community is expendable, that profit is not more important than people. We ask for unity, God. We ask that you break down the walls between Black and Indigenous people. Remind us that we are natural allies, that we fought together before, and we can fight together now. That our liberation is tied together, that when one of us is oppressed, all of us are oppressed. That when one of us wins freedom, all of us move closer to freedom. Give us the wisdom to build coalitions, the humility to listen to each other, the courage to stand with each other, the love to sacrifice for each other. We ask for courage, God, the courage to speak truth when it's dangerous, the courage to demand justice when it's uncomfortable, the courage to resist when it's easier to submit, the courage to fight when we're tired, the courage to hope when everything looks hopeless. Give us the spirit of John Horse who refused to be enslaved. Give us the spirit of the Seminoles who never surrendered. Give us the spirit of the water protectors who stood against militarized police. Give us the courage our ancestors had. We need it now. We ask for protection. We know that speaking truth is dangerous. We know that demanding justice brings retaliation. We know that organizing brings surveillance and repression. Protect us, God. Protect the activists. Protect the organizers. Protect the truth-tellers. Protect the coalition builders. Put a hedge of protection around everyone fighting for justice. Let no weapon formed against us prosper. Let every tongue that rises against us in judgment be condemned. We are your children. Protect us as we do your work. We ask for multiplication. Multiply this message. Let it reach millions. Let it change minds and hearts. Let it inspire action. Let it build movements. Take this one video and turn it into a wave of awakening. Let people who watch this share it. Let people who learn this truth teach it. Let those who understand this history act on it. Multiply the impact beyond what we can imagine. Use this to spark something bigger than any of us. A movement, a reckoning, a transformation. And God, we ask for vindication. For the memory of every ancestor who was lynched, massacred, stolen from, erased. For Thomas Moss and Calvin McDowell and Will Stewart murdered for owning a grocery store. For the 300 people murdered in Tulsa. For the 15,000 who died on the Trail of Tears. For the thousands who died in convict labor camps. For the unnamed, uncounted, unmarked graves. Vindicate them, God. Let their deaths not be in vain. Let their suffering produce justice. Let their memory inspire resistance. Let their names be remembered. Let their stories be told. Let their legacy be freedom for their descendants. We pray all of this in the name of Jesus Christ, who came to set the captives free, who came to proclaim good news to the poor, who came to proclaim liberty to the oppressed, who stood with the marginalized against the powerful, who overturned tables in the temple and called out hypocrisy, who was killed by the state for being too radical, too dangerous, too threatening to the system. We pray in the name of the Jesus who resisted, the Jesus who fought, the Jesus who refused to submit, the Jesus who rose from the dead and proved that death doesn't win, that oppression doesn't win, that the system doesn't win, that justice eventually always wins. We receive your strength. We walk in your truth. We fight in your name. We will not be silent. We will not be divided. We will not be stopped until every acre is returned, until every dollar is repaid, until every prison is emptied, until every pipeline is stopped, until justice flows like water and righteousness like a mighty stream, until liberation is complete, until freedom is real. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen. Walk in truth. Demand justice. Build coalitions. You are a descendant of warriors who fought together. The Black Seminoles proved that Black and Indigenous unity is possible and powerful. Honor that legacy. Live that legacy. Be that legacy. Until next time, support land back. Demand reparations. Remember the alliance. Stay dangerous. Stay united. Stay free. God bless you. God strengthen you. God lead you to victory. This is your history. This is your fight. This is your time. Rise up.